I massively rejected the idea of the label of having an eating disorder and eating distress. I remember having to maybe even it took a long, I actually went to specific sessions trying to even say the word eating disorder, even though it's the term I wasn't using, but I wanted to explore. I said it brought up so much for me. I didn't want to I just don't say that. If I was honest with myself, it brought up a lot of pain and shame. So to be honest with you, my earliest memory of being really like, okay, Jacqueline, there's something kind of off here. Probably around 16, I probably started taking my own recovery into my own hands, because all of my behaviours throughout, I suppose, look, I didn't know, I didn't know people were having, the way I was approaching dinner time and my family approaching dinner time, I just thought everyone else is, when you're younger, and you're like, oh yeah, this is what I do at home, and then you're like, what? And you're like, oh wait, what? And that's weird. So,
cause everything feels bigger, it's all fire and little stones come.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. You are listening to Don't Be Afraid to Talk podcast with James. I believe if we are going to affect change, we must go back to the basic, which for me, in essence, is conversations. Talking and listening is key for growth, and I hope our stories will bring us together and we can draw inspiration from each other. Conversation will include topics such as mental and physical health, trauma and its effect, suicidal thoughts, recovery, and well-being. We will continue to raise awareness and offer a different perspective, a mindset or an idea that could inspire you to take charge of your well-being and to grow as a human being. Thank you for joining us today. Today I'm joined by Jacqueline and we're going to be discussing all things eating disorder. If you are listening today, have an open mind. If you are listening today, have an open mind and we hope you can learn something from today's episode. Jacqueline, how are you?
I am good, James. I like what you said there. Have an open mind. I am very happy to be here. As I just mentioned before we clicked the record button, I am in a very luxurious position because I know what it's like when you're on the other side of the microphone. So I'm just buzzing to be here. So thank you so much for asking me. Yeah.
Can you just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, a little bit. Oh, okay.
Yes,
right.
a little bit.
You'll give me an inch, and I'll probably take a mile every time you ask me something.
40 seconds.
A little bit about right, 40 seconds. Okay. So, my name is Jacqueline Campion, and I work at the Marino Therapy Centre, which is a family-run centre that specialises in working with people towards full recovery from eating disorders, or how we refer to it as eating distress. I've been working in the area for about 11 years now. So I've explored lots of different parts between studying nutrition, doing school talks, started as the cleaner, went on to the phones. I've kind of covered everything, trained in lots of different areas, and now I am a recovery coach and working with clients one-to-one, doing group sessions, doing training sessions, training other professionals working in the area, training teachers and guidance counsellors, and just doing our best to educate people about not just eating distress, but the full recovery from it. And I suppose just melting the shame and the stigma that unfortunately still tends to go hand in hand with it. That's probably over 40 seconds though, James.
Yeah, time's up. Let's go. Okay. Before we get going, we're going to play 1 for 1.
Oh.
I'll give you a word and you say the first thing that comes to your mind.
Oh, you didn't tell me. Okay, right, cool.
Okay.
Cool. Right.
They're just random words that I picked up, that I wrote down. Okay. The first word is emotions.
Love them.
Language.
Very important.
Freedom.
Liberation.
Understanding.
Essential.
And the last one, expression.
So many forms, explore it. 5, 7 words.
6, 7 words.
I cheated on that one. But that's just what
explore. Yeah.
The new game is 1 for 5.
1 for 1 is easier. It's meant to be spontaneous.
That was very spontaneous.
Okay. Let me go back to my other notes that I have. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to explore a little bit about your own experience with ED, and then we do a Q&A session. Yeah, and okay, I have 2 separate notes here. So
brilliant.
No, not that one. Not this one. Oh yeah, I have the right one. So this is just a couple of questions. We'll start with the obvious one, which is, what is ED?
What is ED? Well, if we're going back to our 1 for 1 question, it's a lot of things. But to put it very simply, I suppose, eating ED. So most of the people listening to this are going to be more familiar with the term eating disorder. So in the DSM-5, I think we're on now. So the diagnostic, the manual basically of all diagnostics would label when eating disorders. So within there you have anorexia, bulimia, you have binge eating disorder, you now have OSFED and endonos in there as well officially. So they are very much so labelling the behaviours that go hand in hand with eating disorder, as we refer to it as eating distress. And they're kind of just tipping, they're just like kind of really just the tip of the iceberg. There's eating distress, as we refer to it. We don't really see anybody that we've worked with as disordered, so we changed the terminology, because eating disorder would have you think that the issue and the problem is around food and the body. But I suppose how it manifests that way in lots of different ways. Your own internal emotional turmoil. It's really kind of manifested on your physical behaviours around food, body, exercise. There's a whole large spectrum of distorted or destructive behaviours, chewing and spitting, ARFID, restrictive intake, again, disorder is how it's kind of officially called, orthorexia, obsession with health food, obsession with exercising, pica. There's so many different forms of it, but ultimately what it is, when somebody, a lot of this is on happening on a subconscious level. It's very gradually kind of developing over time. It can even be there, the distress can be there without even the destructive behaviour. But I suppose, to put it very simple, it's very much so like a not good enough syndrome. You don't feel like you're good enough, you don't feel like you're worthy, you don't feel like you're deserving. You don't feel like you're in the driver's seat of your own life, nor do you feel like you have the power or capability to do that. So I suppose unconsciously, without a lot of time, even without that kind of conscious decision, you end up practicing self-harming behaviours on yourself. So a lot of the time when we talk about self-harm, we think about a lot of the time just kind of the cushion,
physical,
things like that. But
physical part of it. Yeah,
so there's particular, and a lot of that, even kind of, skin picking, hair pulling, all of those kind of things are often really much so part of the eating distress, the distress that's eating the person. So it's very much so, it's developing a destructive coping mechanism to try and just cope with life, and ultimately kind of numb out a lot of the time. A lot of the destructive behaviours we practice are there to numb out from discomfort. But we're not always consciously aware of that.
And is this something that you would experience yourself growing up?
Yeah, so this is a reason that I'm really passionate about the area of recovery from eating distress and eating disorders, because I myself have my own personal experiences with it. So my experience, was maybe, I don't want to say a little bit, would I say, I don't know, a little bit kind of maybe different. It wasn't, nobody's journey is typical with it, but my earliest memory experience in eating distress would be probably from around that kind of 5-6 mark, when I was about 5 or 6 years of age. And my earliest kind of memory with it, how I would describe it, as I just felt very claustrophobic, severely and acutely claustrophobic in my own body. A lot of distress, feeling like I almost felt trapped in it, like I'd want to just cut off my own body and just run away from it. My behaviours varied over the years. At 5 or 6 years of age, I wasn't consciously saying I wanted to lose weight, which is often a massive misconception, and I'm sure we'll go through a lot of those, you know, throughout the podcast, but it's a huge misconception that it's about weight. But yeah, I have my own personal experience over from about 5 to 6, and I probably wasn't really fully recovered. Probably it reached the recovery part at around 20.
Yeah.
So it was kind of very much so throughout my early kind of childhood, throughout the teens, very much so part of my life.
When did you become aware of it? That you're consciously aware of, like, you're doing these behaviors?
Yeah, to be honest with you, it took a really long time, James. I massively rejected the idea of the label of having an eating disorder and eating distress. I remember having to maybe even go to, it took a long, I actually went to specific sessions trying to even say the word eating disorder, even though it's the term I wasn't using, but I wanted to explore. I said it brought up so much for me. I didn't want to, like, oh, I just don't say that. If I was honest with myself, it brought up a lot of pain and shame. So to be honest with you, my earliest memory of being really like, okay, Jacqueline, there's something kind of off here. Probably around 16, I probably started taking my own recovery into my own hands, because all of my behaviours throughout, I suppose, look, I didn't know, like, well, I didn't know people were having, like, the way I was approaching dinner time and my family approaching dinner time, I just thought everyone else is, you know, when you're younger, and you're like, oh yeah, this is what I do at home, and then you're like, what? And you're like, oh wait, what? And that's weird. So yeah, it took, but even again, I suppose even through 16 and 19, I was back forth, up and down, kind of thinking. Even through college, I was like, yeah, but I suppose being honest, around 16, I got a couple of, like, my body had kind of fluctuated and changed over the years. So when I was younger, there would have been quite a lot of name calling based on my, maybe not a lot of name calling, but I definitely remember it was
some name calling.
People were more aware of it than maybe I was. You know, I'd kind of come home and I'd be confused. I suppose I felt so uncomfortable in my body, but people were kind of
making comments.
Yeah, making comments in a way, you know, you're just on the road and, like, you're hanging out with you think they're your mates at the time. But so it was a very confusing time for me, because I suppose my mum was probably quite, you know, conscious of not wanting to maybe put a label on it.
But you never tried to hide or anything, did you? At home?
To be... yeah, no, I see that's like, it's a really good question, because I had lots of different behaviours. So I would have been, you know, what is known as maybe secret eating, you know, hiding food. I would have also been, you know, avoiding food. So it was weird. I suppose, like, even bringing home lunches, like, I'd be stockpiling, like, this isn't a great thing to make. It's not that nice food. Like, I'd go between you'd be bouncing between, you know, trying to hide food and the food that I was eating, and then stock, like, knowing that, like, okay, I'm bringing home my lunches, but I don't want my mum to see that. So I didn't consciously know what I was technically doing. Yeah. But I knew I'd be trying to hide, sneak, put all these, you know, it's a very creative, destructive condition. So I remember I was someone before that I was speaking to, and she described it's like espionage. You know, you kind of, like, you develop this kind of, like, 007 kind of technique that you can, you know, you're trying to suss what's happening and hide things. So I was hiding it. I mean, it's kind of like my mom at the time, like, she had her own experience through recovery as well. So yeah, like, I mean, people at home knew I was hiding it, but still not consciously accepting that, like, this is probably something you could maybe look at.
This is probably an obvious question, but it might sound obvious, but probably is an obvious question. With ED, do you constantly think about food all the time?
It's not really an obvious question, because I suppose it's not normally a question, it's normally a statement. So it's a really good question. Yeah, like they say, right? You know, those people out there, like, the research show that the average person has about 60,000 thoughts a day. Now, I think when you're experiencing eating distress, you've got about 80,000 thoughts a day, because you've got such hypersensitivity, and you've often got very little boundaries, and your mind is just a place of chaos. So yeah, like, there's a lot of, again, it's that kind of espionage. It's more even, you know, it's around food and the body, but it's a lot of kind of this happening? When's that happening? It can it can be simple things like that can seem really innocent. Like, I've checked the menu before I'm going somewhere. Now that's really a lot of people do that. A lot of
people do
it's
that.
kind of seen as just, I've checked the menu before we go. But the difference is kind of like the intention behind all of these thoughts.
Okay.
A lot of people think, what am I going to have for dinner later on? Or I'm going to go to the shopping. But the nature is not even that. Yes, you are thinking, it consumes your mind. But it's not just even about food. It's like, it's what people are thinking of you. It's the hypervigilance of how you're being perceived. So yes, there is a high majority of thoughts going on food, but there's a lot of even other stuff going. It's just like such like just being incredibly painfully
So
self-conscious.
even though you're thinking about food, but you're also considering opinions. It's not just me thinking, oh, what am I having for dinner? I'm thinking, what would this person say? What would, like...
It's almost, the word that comes to mind is meaning, James. It's like the meaning behind, if I do this, if I eat this, if I go here, if I don't. Do you know, it's even like the meaning that we're attaching to it. So there's so much thought about food, but... Will I pause that? Will I just go?
No, we just
okay.
answer the phone.
I'm in the office, unfortunately. Go back. So it's very much so the role it's playing in your life. There's a lot of thought that goes on food and the body, because there's such emptiness and loneliness that this is like filling the hole in the soul. I once heard Jerry Hussey describe it as, and I thought there was a beautiful analogy for it, because it's center stage in your life, more so than even your relationships, because obsession is a wonderful distraction from certain things, and there's a lot of stuff going on underneath the iceberg that is the behaviour. So there's quite a lot.
And for yourself, do you think you fully recovered from it?
I do. Yeah, I do. It's interesting.
You're thinking about it.
I was like, geez, you put me on the spot there. Like, it almost sounds like it's a challenge. I would see myself, I had a buddy in my head, who dictated everything that I did, that completely stole my voice, that didn't make me even realize that I had a choice, not only in how I treat my body or how I nourish my body or how I don't nourish my body. And it was all I wasn't even aware of the regime and the Hitler that was in my head. And I do believe that I am fully free from that. I don't use destructive coping mechanisms to cope with life anymore. Do I experience stress? Do I have thoughts in my mind sometimes that say, oh, Jacqueline, they're not always cheering me on. Not every single thought I have is a lovely, fluffy one.
Yeah.
But the difference is now is that the strength in my voice and Jacqueline's voice is much stronger for when those other things come in. And when I do have challenges, if I do experience, pain, sadness, again, all these things that are part of our human experience, the difference is that, just not responding with destruction, but actually construction, and kind of saying, okay, how can I support myself with this? I'm not perfect. I'm not going around namaste and all the time.
You have the awareness around your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, come here, that's going to beep. So can we pause this for a second? Because look, sorry, because what's going to happen here is that I really should have, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to plug this out, James. So basically, I hope that doesn't part. I would definitely have a lot of, the relationship with my thoughts and my mind has completely changed. Yeah, absolutely evolved. And it continues to evolve.
Yeah, that's
great.
Never ending journey.
Yes,
no.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for that. We're just going to do a quick Q&A session. So I won't ask you any more personal questions.
Oh, no problem.
So where's my first question? Okay. Obviously working with a lot of clients, which you have a huge experience with ED. So what would be some of the signs that someone can look out for?
So I suppose some of the signs to look out for. I suppose the first thing that comes to mind is the language in your self-talk a lot of the time. You know, if you feel like, I'm going to start with that first before even physical, you know, even if it's yourself or it's a loved one, is there a lot of rules? Is there a lot of like rigidities? Is there a lot of kind of self-deprecating language that you're using when you're speaking to yourself? Like, I can't do this, I shouldn't do this, I have to do this. Or, you know, even maybe you're operating from a very low kind of frequency of like, you know, nothing's going to happen for me, and you're really just seeing life as a very kind of hopeless space, specifically with eating distress, because I know that can kind of tie into lots of other areas and destructive behaviors. But the one thing is about, is your day dictated by your food intake? You know, what you're having, what you're not having. You know, are you noticing that you are hiding food, that you are feeling shame and embarrassment to eat in front of people? Are you tracking calories? Are you getting up in the middle of the night and eating regularly? Are you having quite a large quantity of food in a very short space of time? So is there shame, embarrassment? Is there, you know, your relationship with your body? Do you feel that like when you are a certain size that you will be better, that you will be good enough? Do you notice yourself, and anybody maybe even starts to question your behaviours around your body or nutrition? Do you find yourself getting quite defensive? That's normally where you're going to get a lot of information, because the defensiveness is the nature of eating distress. It's like a virus of the mind. It's like a cancer of the mind. It's really like, it's like a mold. It really is like that cancer of the mind. And if someone comes in to challenge that kind of Hitler in your head, that kind of virus, that not good enough syndrome, it is incredibly defensive because it wants to protect itself. The ED is incredibly protective of itself, because it is quite literally it's like being in an abusive relationship. So that's a lot of information when people question it, or if you're justifying your behaviors quite a lot. Normally when you justify something, we're covering up a lie. So there's like something not matching there. But there's so many different signs, because, James, it manifests in so many different ways as well. It's not just your typical restriction
or intake. It's not just
your
typical, like, I am, a typical one would be like, say someone's anorexia because they don't want to, they eat an apple and they think like, I'm putting on weight. Or the opposite side, they have someone that constantly eating. And I think that's the two kind of, the ones that we would be familiar with. But
sorry, I'm interrupting.
Yeah, that would be the two that we're familiar with. Like, if you say a normal person, there's no normal person, but if you say there's a normal person, could be suffering ED as well, but they just don't have those two. They're just not on the opposite side of what we used to.
Like, absolutely, like you said, who was the normal person? So we get sold all these things. I think it's great that you're even speaking, James, that you're quite aware that other side of the spectrum, like, what is technically, and you know, it's binge eating disorder, we would refer to it as emotional overeating, because we're just not people that tend to experience binge eating. They're not massively, it's not nice to be, but again, we're just very much so not labeling the person. Like the same if you had a broken arm, you know, you wouldn't be like broken arm or fluor. So absolutely, there are so many different behaviors that you could be practicing around food in your body, but you cannot tell based on what somebody looks like. So there's such a large kind of spectrum of destructive behaviours. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, people, like, again, size does not equate health. And we need to make sure we're regularly checking our blood tests, because that's a lot of the time you can be at the sharpest edge of the knife, and, you know, in terms of health. And you know, you're not, again, what we're sold as what is unhealthy. Yeah, again, like, so much on size.
Like, but your appearance could look, in the eyes of the world, good, but your blood could be telling a different story.
Absolutely. We celebrate, you know, high levels of muscle mass, low levels of fat percentage. We celebrate, intense training. We celebrate restriction. Now, there's a huge movement happening with that, but that's really important. As like, okay, we are part of society, so we have a role to play with that as well. Be the changes you want to see, but absolutely start questioning more the messages that we're getting. That this is what health looks like. Health is in science, and it doesn't look a certain way. It's check the numbers on your iron levels and your ferritin and your estrogen, your testosterone, your progesterone. That's where you're going to get it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, not just the weight scale.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like that's, for cattle and fish. Yeah.
And emotional eating, is that something that people do, again, out of discomfort?
Yeah, I suppose, I'll speak maybe from both personal and professional experience. Is it something that people do out of discomfort? I think one thing about emotional eating, so this is, again, there's a huge, why we refer to it as emotional overeating, and that's what we're kind of referring to as what is going to be labelled as binge eating. So there's kind of, I suppose, there's one kind of side of it where it's emotional eating, where, you're feeling a certain way. So yeah, you want to just soothe yourself with food.
Yeah.
Normally, and okay, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not always the most helpful way. So it's not a place of shaming that or anything like that. It's just saying, okay, is there something more, constructive, more helpful here? Because this is obviously a huge thing that kind of came out throughout the last kind of 2 years, that a lot of people were going to nutrition to soothe themselves. From experience, a lot of the time, our behaviours are there to numb out and disconnect from that feeling of discomfort. Absolutely. It can be pain, sadness. I think loneliness, to be honest, I think loneliness is the biggest killer at the moment. Then everything, the so-called obesity, and like we were saying, the war, or the obesity task force in place, but loneliness.
Yes.
It's very much so. Where we have it there it's like an anesthesia, to numb out from that discomfort, because we're neurologically wired to run from discomfort. That doesn't mean there's anything, because I know myself, even like I was saying, anytime I start something, or if I'm doing public speaking, or if even sometimes before a session, or if I'm going off a podcast, my body's like shutting down, being like, no, we're not doing this, because it's uncomfortable to, go outside your comfort zone. Magic happens out there. I think if you notice yourself self-soothing, self-medicating, numbing out with food, it's a beautiful opportunity to start getting curious about what's kind of happening below that kind of iceberg, because it's not what we see is the problem. That's the solution to an underlying, issue, for want of it.
Yeah. So what's happening is there's more to than just saying I have ED. Like with emotional eating, the message is listening to why is that feeling coming up, and the food is just your solution.
Yeah, the thing is with eating distress, what makes it quite challenging is that there's a huge disconnect with the mind and the body. So that relationship with the body has been you're so disconnected, you wouldn't be able to practice. Like I physically wouldn't be capable to do what I did years ago, because it'd kill me now, because the body would go into, I just couldn't physically do it. So there's a huge disconnect. That's why you're able, because when you're so in your head, when you're so identifying with your thinking, when you're identifying with your mind, and you're this whole false sense of identity, you're up here, you're capable of taking out all those destructive behaviours. So I wouldn't always say why the pain straight away, but definitely we look at kind of the way that we would work. So we look at the thinking first. So we bring awareness to the thinking, because if we straight away go into feeling, when you are very body mind disconnected and someone's saying, okay, well, how do you feel? And most of the time, okay, wait, I need to think about that. But there's so much of that kind of virus and cancer in the mind that a lot of the time it can be the condition, the eating distress, all those unhelpful thoughts hijacking. So we bring awareness to the thinking, we get curious of the self-talk, we recognize how we can kind of transform it, and create it into something more constructive. And then slowly but surely, because even with nutrition, the signals aren't there because, hunger, fullness, we do require that kind of mechanical nourishment. We also need to nourish the mind, the body, like the brain, the neurotransmitters. We need to fuel the metabolism. There's this huge element there about even with the nutrition side of things. So we would work with mechanical nourishment to just even get those kind of functionalities back. We want to bring the body to homeostasis eventually. And then we can start kind of connecting with the body, noticing what's happening in the body. And that's where the body will give us a lot of information and things like pain, sadness. We can explore that then, but we don't go into that straight away because it'd be like throwing someone into the deep end as soon as they're learning how to swim. That could actually be much more traumatic and almost terrify us even more. It goes into the subconscious where you're like, forget about that. I'm not going into there. No, thank you. So I don't know if that really answers your question.
So it's more about reframing your mind to understand what's happening, and then dive into the message your body's giving you.
I mean, if you're, diving in, fair play to you. Yeah, if you're absolutely,
if you're ready for it.
And I suppose, do you ever feel ready for it? Do you know, this is one thing. Do you ever really feel ready for it? Because we're neurologically wired to run from discomfort. So I think it's like, just because you feel resistance from that doesn't, I think that's even working with the resistance, tapping into that. So absolutely, I would always kind of bring recovery down to 3 A's. I love alliteration and simplicity. So awareness, acceptance, action. So when you're bringing awareness even to your thinking, awareness to your self-talk, you're accepting, when you're bringing awareness to that kind of Hitler in your head, that regime, when you accept that there's a regime in place, how do you take down a regime? You educate the people and you encourage them to question. So this is the thing about educating ourselves, not just bringing awareness. When you have awareness that, there's a bully there and there's a regime there, that's not enough. It needs action. So this is the thing about the same, like with anything, like even with manifestation requires action as well. So, excuse me, awareness, acceptance, action. Then you're starting to kind of learn not just about the regime. So it's like even like a boxing match. You're not just learning about your opponent. You're also learning about your strengths and the strengths that you have, because obviously this component at the red corner has been training unopposed most of the time for years. This is developing for years. It's not good enough syndrome, this coping mechanism to kind of protect ourselves from certain things or symptomatic of certain things. So you're not just learning about your opponent, but you're training yourself as well. And you're getting into the ring and you're challenging yourself bit by bit by bit by bit. And you're getting stronger and stronger and stronger the more that you're doing that. And it's uncomfortable, but it gets much easier. You just keep exposing yourself to those elements. Do I love vulnerability? No, I wouldn't be mad about it, but I love the results most of the time.
That comes with it,
So you can be still results orientated sometimes. I'm all about detaching from the outcome, but you don't always have to wait till you're ready.
And the relationship we have with our body, obviously, that's another big stigma, especially when you have low self-esteem and you have ED as well. So the relationship with how you see your body is a huge one.
Yeah.
So how does that? So for someone who's ED, sorry, let me rephrase this question. Let me have my drink of water first. Sorry.
No, makes sense.
Sorry.
No.
Okay, what was my next question? Okay, so
the body.
So I'll rephrase this question. So how important is it to build a good relationship with your body when you have behaviors that's like related to ED? Like if you're constantly thinking about food, for example, or constantly thinking about way to hide food, obviously that plays a big part on how you actually see your own body. So how important is it to kind of build that foundation where you just like accept the body the way it is.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, let me start again. Sorry.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I know what I'm trying to say. my mind is running away from me.
Yeah, trust yourself.
I'll come back to that question. It'll come back to me again. I know what I'm trying to say, but my mind is like...
It's a great question.
My mind
Are
is
you
taking,
sure?
Yeah, my mind's taking me somewhere else. I'll come back to that question.
Okay. Yeah, go for it. You're the boss.
My next question is... Sorry, someone actually sent me this. How can I help a friend or family member living with ED?
It's a fabulous question, and I think it's gorgeous that someone has sent that in. The best thing that you could do, I would say, educate yourself. That's the whole point of even like with my own podcast, the Calm It Out podcast, is I would even recommend a particular episode for that person to listen to. Because we need to educate ourselves. We need to educate ourselves about what eating distress is and what it isn't. You got to learn a particular language really as well. The best thing that you can do is learn about recovery. First of all, even knowing that full recovery is possible. Sometimes our loved ones are more enthusiastic about the whole recovery process than we are. So even for that person there, even if they see resources or they see accounts or they're seeing podcasts, or even, for example, this being like, okay, I saw that, I was listening to, James's podcast there and he was speaking to somebody and they were talking about full recovery. Like, did you know you could be fully recovered from this? Did you know you could be fully, free from it? Even just starting there. If that person is, I suppose, in the process of recovery, as I said, educating, learning about just being there to listen, not putting the pressure on themselves to have the answers. Like really just more so even remind the person of like, look, I mightn't understand exactly what you're going through, but like, I just want you to know that like, I am here. I mightn't always have the answers, but I want to learn about this. So even like you could teach me, how could I support you? How can I make this maybe easier for you? Or how could I, actually just even engage in that space where, because when you're experiencing eating distress, you really believe that the world sometimes will just be better off without you. It's a very, very it's a very dark space to be in, and it's incredibly lonely and isolating space. And the nature of eating distress, because it's like that abusive behaviour, is that the condition wants us to isolate ourselves, because that's when the condition of ED gets much stronger. So the more you can even make connections, I'd probably say have patience. It can be quite sometimes challenging when someone you care for is experiencing eating distress, because when we're experiencing eating distress, we can say no a lot. We can push people away, like plans. You can kind of feel like, Jesus, Jacqueline's forever flaking or cancelling last minute, or she never says yes, and why would I keep asking her? If you get a sense that that person is maybe experiencing something like eating distress, just even asking them, we really want you to be here. I really would love to spend time with you, because it's challenging to even comprehend how much you just think nobody... Why would anybody want to hang out with you? Because when you don't feel good enough and you don't see your own worth, it's very challenging to even feel that connection. So, even learning to simple things, not commenting on how someone looks, in terms of size, even certain things like, okay, oh, you look a bit brighter, or instead of even like, oh, you look this or you look that, maybe you might notice that person just seems a little kind of more lower on energy. Or, they maybe just look a little bit paler. They're maybe not getting the nutrients that they need. Just even kind of terminology like that a little bit instead. Or if you're even closer, it depends. Like, look, I've noticed that you seem a little bit uncomfortable, or notices a bit of distress comes up for you around the nutrition. I found, this group here, we run in Marino, we're running group sessions every week, and you can say, look, this is on Zoom. You can even go and turn your camera off. You don't have to say anything. Or I found this whole podcast. This is all about recovery. Just even planting little seeds, not asking someone straight away how they feel, but just, you're there for them. You're willing to learn. You're there to support them, and just having patience with that person, because it's very challenging being on the outside looking in, and it's a very complex condition.
So would you say is a link between that and depression?
Yeah, I mean, so the way that we would see it as well is that, like, depression we would see is an emotion as opposed to an illness. Depression is, the way that we see it is that with eating distress, you know, this is the thing about even with depression, when we see it as an illness, when we see like there's something wrong, it can be part of the human experience. We don't, it's information as opposed to a problem. So the way that a lot of the time people with eating distress, this often happens here, especially when you're working with men, it's often like it's depression, but they feel a lot of shame and stigma to say it's anything to do with eating distress, you know. So this is the thing where when you're experiencing eating distress, there are they're very, very dark times. I mean, it is the highest mortality rate of all psychiatric illnesses. You know, it's not comfortable to speak about, but there is a huge connection with suicide. And a lot of ED goes undiagnosed. You know, all the statistics that we have about ED, that's just the people that are actually speaking about it openly and normally getting themselves to places like hospitals or treatment centres. But there are many, and especially men and members of the LGBTQ plus community that are suffering in silence. And that's the kind of stuff as well where we want to start shaking off a couple of those.
Sorry, they're suffering from ED?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
You know, and I think this is the thing, we can often even say like the depression, like depression, if you're, as I said, you're in a very dark space, that is very much so part of eating distress. You know, and that's all part of the recovery as well. When you're recovering from eating distress, that distress that's eating you, you are learning about even those darker moments, bringing awareness that, you know, how to protect yourself from those, or even if you do experience lower times, you're there being a best friend to yourself. You don't go into that kind of spiral and then into that self-destruction. Your sense of worth and being in that relationship with yourself is so much more, you know, healthier and at a higher level, that you don't go to the same, you know, the lows get higher all the time throughout the journey.
So would you say, like for men, they would talk about depression before they talk about ED?
Yeah, I've definitely seen there can be a massive resistance to actually kind of say, okay, I think this might be, you know, an eating distress that I'm experiencing, because unfortunately it's just been sold for so long. Now we've been, as just a, you know, a young female's, you know, problem.
Yeah, yeah, that's the way it's sold. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and look, there's shifts happening there, but they're always slower than we would like it. So it does not discriminate. This is a condition of the mind, and nothing else. You know, it doesn't discriminate against anything. So it's so important to keep that open mind that you mentioned even at the beginning, and kind of say, okay, how would I describe my relationship with myself? How would I describe my relationship with food? How would I describe my relationship with my body? We don't have to straight away say, oh, I have an eating disorder. You're kind of going, okay, I'm experiencing distress. This can be temporary. We can take it seriously, but actually have a bit of lightness about it as well.
Yeah.
And say, okay, that's it. You know, James, you're X, Y, and Z now. You know, that's just something you're experiencing. It's a behaviour. It's information. And it can all be temporary. So there's no space for shame. And shame can't live in the spoken word.
So do you think, just going back on that, it's most likely seen as like that, more of a women thing rather than men? And that's probably because women are painted a certain picture in society, and if they don't fit into that picture, that's when the mind start playing games with you. You know?
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot more pressure on women to look a certain way than it is for men. And so maybe that's why, like, they rather talk about depression than ED, because they're going to be like, no, I don't have that. I don't have that. Yeah. Well, women will probably be like, I probably do have that, because they're more conscious about how they look than men would be.
Yeah. I think it depends on who you talk to. I mean, yes, of course, you can't deny the fact of, you know, women and what we've been subjected to over the decades with things like diet culture and messaging. But there's a lot of messages out there for men as well. You know, and I suppose one thing, like, look, the first diagnosis of ED, and the first study done on ED was actually on, like, the first diagnosis was on a young male. This is going back in history. And again, it's through lots of different things. I think it got into the narrative because a lot of the time people who were affording ED treatment, I'm talking decades ago, were normally, young white females. That's how it all gets sold that way. So that gets seeped into the media, goes into the narrative, and that kind of absolutely, it takes over. The other part, but I still think it's so important to say, like, this is actually, I suppose it's different ways. A lot of the time, even with men, in terms of athletic ability and, muscle mass and ability with that, there's huge pressures there. Do you know about what way, you're showing up with that? And I think there's a lot, I think I've in the last 5-6 years recently seen how dangerous the celebration of, these ultra marathons, things like, there's nothing wrong with marathons or Ironman or triathlons or anything like that. But you want to get curious about your intention, and you want to get curious about how healthy your fit body is.
Yes.
And this is the thing about how much of our worth is tied in with that, and how much we use these things as a sense of being in the driver's seat of our own life. I'm not saying everybody does that, but I think it's kind of, it's presenting itself in different ways. And there's pressures. I think if you look closely, there's pressures on
both sides,
on genders across the board. Yeah. And then I think you're looking at everything in between as well. When you're looking in terms of, obviously, the huge movement in terms of how people are identifying. And as I said, the LGBTQ plus community. And while we're working with people, trans male, trans female, the part that ED plays in that as well, because obviously that's quite complex. There's so many layers to this, and I think if we just, like, look, when the aliens come, we'll all be just one race, really, won't we? Do you know what I mean? All these labels will go out the window, and I think,
we are going to be just one eventually.
Exactly. Do you know? And I think that's as well where, like, for me personally, I'm like, look, do you want to put that narrative to the side for the minute and kind of go, and this is, like, you're going to get more answers from not psychology or psychotherapy a lot of the time, but actually from anthropology and looking, because you can see in different communities when there is more connection, whether we have such an individualized society now. We've our own TV programs, our own playlists, our own X, Y, and Z. We have earphones in, we go around. When you look at communities that have a high level of connection, there's a lot of this being reflected in the relationship with the body, and so many different studies of the more that the East is getting influenced by the Western cultures, it's impacted, like, your body, like, okay, yes, of course, even with women, but especially as I'm not ruling out, other genders as well, but, like, it's our currency. We've a long way to go before we recover from that. Weighing, size, how we look. There's huge, great movements happening, but we have a bit to go, and I think it's a couple of generations. Yeah,
definitely, yeah.
Before maybe our children's children are maybe looking back and you're going, God Almighty,
what were they doing?
What were they doing?
So. And why do more women suffer from body shame? Is that why is that happening? Is that because they don't, like, they're more aware of what they eat? Like, if they have to be at a wedding in 2 weeks, they're gonna stop eating for a couple of days because they want to look a certain way, and all that feeds into the body shame. Like, why is that more and more rampant? Is it because that's what people are seeing and they think that's what it should be?
Again, is body shame more rampant? I actually sometimes think it's flipped a little bit. Years ago, like, this is a virus that adapts in order to survive. So years ago, when you were typically experiencing eating distress, you would have put layers and layers and layers and layers of clothes on yourself, and because you didn't want anybody to know that you were practicing any behaviours. Now there's a huge shift where we are, saying we're hating our bodies, we're harming our bodies, but we are wearing the tightest clothes. We are wearing, we're we're going around like peacocks with our bodies. It's our, again, it's that kind of currency. It's a reflection of our worth. So this kind of the ego has developed, and our false sense of identity, I think so much of it is being put into how we look. And the same way as well, though, in terms of, I still don't rule out like that's more of an issue for women. I mean, look, I think we can I think there's much more men suffering in silence. I know most of the men that I even see here, I might be the only person that they're speaking to about this.
Yeah.
This has been something that's been going on for them for years. So the body shame, I think, the pressures, like across the board, we have so much access to information and selective information. A lot of the information we get on the internet now is open to interpretation.
Oh,
so
definitely,
social media, like, you know, you think about even not just, okay, the articles, there are people behind each article. So this is the thing about, we blame society, when we blame particular, you know, obviously it's not in online newspapers most of the time now.
Yeah.
The people behind those. So this is really layered. There's still this idea of like, you need clickbait. This is what is like, if I see somebody and they've moved, and I've got some dramatic headline about, again, like, look, Adele, her brand new album is out. We have been waiting for this. She is one of the most talented performers that we have seen in a long time. And what's the main narrative around her? Her transformation.
Yeah.
She looks wonderful. So the narrative is there, alive and well, but there are people writing those stories, and that's on a personal level. Are we being the change we want to see? And this is one thing with ED recovery as well. Why are we shaming each other's bodies? I mean, I think that's a whole other topic. You know, shame, the cultures we've grown up, our subcultures, the world around us, the world within us, even in the spaces that we're born into. There's so many different cultures that not every culture is supporting that kind of idea, that body, like, we put our identities and our worth into different things. But I mean, instead of asking like, why is that happening, I'd probably be more likely to say, James, well, what can we do about it? And I think on a personal level, we watch the way we speak to one another. We bring awareness to our own judgments. We don't shame ourselves for having that judgment. And we just kind of say like, okay, is this actually my thoughts and my values? Or is this kind of being conditioned from the outside? Oh, Jesus, I feel like this today. And, you know, we can start questioning things ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. No, we definitely have to do more of that. We see a headline and we hold on to it and we think that's reality. It's not reality. And I have a question here. How can I combat eating disorder, ED?
How can you combat an eating disorder? Okay, so before you go into combat, okay, I'd probably do some training first. So one thing is you learn about the condition of the eating distress. You bring, like, as I said, that whole, like, the resources that I put out through even the Instagram page or the podcast and that, there are so many different specific topics to look at, because this is everything. This is about bringing awareness to your self-talk. Look at the relationship with I'd encourage that person to maybe get curious about the relationship with themselves, food and their body, and then actually get curious about like how they'd like that to be and what they think would need to happen. Ultimately, how do you combat an eating distress is that you start educating yourself that freedom is possible. That's first and foremost. Full recovery is possible. Full freedom is possible. I'd never encourage anybody to, invest into this and just learn to manage it and to deal with it. Living with an ED is not living at all. It's a half life.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, full recovery is possible. Continuously melt the shame and remind yourself you're not on your own, and this is not unusual and it can be temporary. And I suppose, you practice on, like you said, translating your language, learning the language of Friedish, as we would call it, how to support yourself. You need to make a conscious effort to challenge certain things around nutrition, around exercise, whatever that relationship is. The bully in your head has quite a large influence. So challenging that bully in your head as well, learning to kind of piss it off a little bit. I often say, rock the boat a little bit, but learn about. There's so many resources out there. As I said, the Calm It Out podcast, the Instagram, wherever you're going, even just making that first appointment or going to a group session somewhere, wherever you're going, make sure they're talking about full recovery.
Yeah. And can you have ED with what we call healthy eating habit?
Sorry, I actually just randomly came back to the last question. Do you know the simpler version? Sorry, I would promise I'm back to one, but you know, combat and the ED ultimately is learning to actually respect yourself, and respecting your body, and then learning to actually like yourself, and then eventually you might learn to love yourself, but don't terrify yourself. But it's learning to be your best friend. That's ultimately how I would say it. Going back to your other fabulous question, can you have healthy eating habits and ED?
Yeah.
Again, it comes back to your definition. Like, what's your definition of health? Like,
okay, well, like eating good food. When I say good food, I mean like not processed food, and not food made in the lab. Just eating good food, like food that has a bit of life in it. There's not that many anymore, but just healthy eating habits. Like, you're not living off fast food, you know. Now, you might have that every now and again, but it's not part of your diet, you know. And you're not living off like microwave fast food. You're living off like just raw good food. Can you still have ED?
Can you still have ED
and eat healthy?
Absolutely. Like, again, it comes back to when you're so I would like nutrition. It's like toxicology. It's not always the poison, it's the dosage. So like you're saying, like, instead of moving away from good and bad food, it's like good and bad people. As soon as you label one thing as good, you're labeling the other as bad. So it's going to be impossible to feel good or feel lightness if you're having something bad. So that's first and foremost where you're removing the judgment from your language. Of course, like, when you're like, can you still kind of eat healthy and have ED? Like, you can absolutely become, again, you can be quite obsessed with, you know,
what you're eating.
Only having, you can be like with anything. You could be like, like you're talking about, like not eating food from a lab. Like, that's fair enough if you want to kind of get organic and you want to get fruit and veg and you want to have, you want to look after that. Like, ultimately, when you're recovering from ED, you are prioritizing your health. You're looking after your health. You're valuing your health. So it's very much so balanced. So again, I think that really is about, like, you know, you can get quite obsessed with it as well.
Yeah, you can.
I only do this. You can start identifying with it, and then you can feel really crap. You're like, oh my God, I shouldn't have eaten that, and I haven't eaten that in ages. Like, this whole kind of crap that goes on about sugar all the time is just ridiculous. Do you know, like sugar is bad, and you shouldn't have this, and you know, you need to go and bring a calculator out with you to figure out how good you were in the day these days. Like, like sugar, you don't want to, like, but the more you're in tune with your body, the more you're connected with your body, it's going to give you information. You don't want to say, like, oh, how many grams of iron did I have in my intake yesterday? Do you know, when you're quite in tune, your body actually says, you know what, I feel like I'd like a little bit, you know, it's not, you're nourishing with the body as opposed to the mind. So whatever you're eating, whether that's, you know, whatever, it's recognizing the language around it. Is it can't have to, you should, need to? Is there a pressure there? Is there a guilt if you don't? So absolutely. I mean, you can have ED and practice so many different behaviors around food. You could be all organic, you could be all vegan, you could be all carnivore, you can be, you know, whatever, carb loading for your training. There's so many ways that you can do it. Absolutely. You can have ED and be doing anything. Put it in.
And I have a question here. So how can a parent spot ED on their child? This is a big question. So I
mean, look, watch out for
especially for, like, if you have teenagers where they have so much external pressures with name calling in school, things like that happening. So how can you begin to identify that?
Yeah, well, one thing I'd say is, like, notice, do you hear a lot of kind of like, I shouldn't have eaten that, or, you know, if you're noticing a lot of kind of commentary, or even there mightn't be verbal commentary, but even just you might feel the energy of kind of distress around certain meal times. Or, for example, even if you're noticing a loved one is very much so committed. See, we celebrate going to the gym all the time as well, and this is a real dangerous area. So that's even one thing. If you notice your loved one, they could be quite dependent on, exercise, and they can feel very low on themselves and very guilty if they haven't done that. So just really noticing that kind of, I feel bad that I shouldn't. If you see a lot of kind of wrappers, if you find papers in your loved one's bedroom, that they've been hiding food or they're kind of storing food. If you've noticed that they've just started to wear the same clothes all the time that are just like really, this happens a lot of the time. It's like, I call it kind of conditioned clothing, that there's just so much shame that you're not even bothered getting dressed anymore.
Okay.
You just put the same stuff on all the time. Your hygiene can go down quite a lot. You just really start to neglect, yourself. You just don't see any worth. Little simple things like that. I suppose, becoming overly dependent on your exercise routine, guilt around the nutrition, hiding the food, noticing languages like, constantly asking for reassurance about how they look, feeling, I suppose, speaking about their body, derogatory, just picking up on those kind of things, and even, checking like, okay, look, I'm noticing that, even with meals, like, are you slowly but surely noticing that there's things getting left on the plate? Are you slowly but surely noticing that someone's eating their dinner or their lunch incredibly fast? That's, it's gone in a second, watching out for, obviously, how someone's maybe using the bathroom. You might notice even in the bathroom, you can see there that maybe somebody is practicing purging. Just trust your gut with it. A lot of the time when a parent has a sense of these things, you're more than likely probably right. Yeah. And that's where I'd encourage you to kind of, research recovery and supports for parents. And I think it's a very lonely and isolating place when a parent or a partner has experienced some ED. So for them to get support and help, first and foremost, from someone who is specialising in the area, definitely.
And where do you specialise? Where are you based?
So Marino Therapy Centre, to confuse everybody, is actually based in Drumcondra at the moment. So we
is it not in Marino?
In Dublin. No, it was. We've moved. So the centre has been the centre's been running for over 30 years now. So there's been a couple of different locations. So now we're in Drumcondra. So like even contacting, like, as I said, even the Call It Out podcast, there's 2 seasons there. There's one particularly for any parents and carers or even partners to listen to that, to realise, because you'll kind of say, oh yeah, actually that's what I've been experiencing. Like, we have groups every Tuesday evening, 7:30 to 9 on Zoom at the moment. You can just sign on marinotherapycentre.com. You can send us an email, or at MarinoTC on the Instagram. You can send a DM if you've any questions. Please don't hesitate to ask. Just even send that first message, that first email, or something on even for your first group. Huge, absolutely huge. This can be temporary, and you're absolutely not alone. Yeah,
and you can just knock your camera off if you don't want to be seen.
That's totally fine also. Like, look, we love to have people's faces there, of course, but like, look, if it means getting yourself to come along and learn about freedom and learn about how to support yourself, then please, I mean, you're more than welcome. Yeah.
Last question. Without having self-awareness, do you think ED can pretty much go on for most of your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I said, unfortunately, if you're not working on it, this has the highest the highest mortality rate of all psychiatric illnesses. So unfortunately, people are still continuing to pass away from this illness, and nobody has to. Nobody should be dying from ED at this day and age. But it requires a lot of intensity. At the beginning, it requires the commitment and the consistency with it, but absolutely having the awareness is key, and then shifting that awareness to a place where we can say, okay, well, what can we do about it? but it's chipping away at it. It's melting away at that iceberg. It's not about kind of going straight into combat,
yeah.
and tackling it. Absolutely. Going gentle with yourself, you know, firm with the condition, but, you know, gentle with yourself and supporting yourself throughout it. And you can actually really enjoy it. Like, it's about having fun. It's about lightening up. It's about learning to have a laugh again.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah,
it's not just have to be so serious all the time.
Yeah, that goes back to the language you use when you're doing it. You know, if something is a must for you, you're always kind of hesitant. But if you want to do it, like, this is fun, then, like, even your body changes. You know,
Yeah.
if you're like, oh, I have to do this, then your body's like down, and you're like, oh. But if you're excited about it, you know, you get a different outcome. And so my last 3 questions, which is not on this iPad, I don't know why I'm looking at it. What does well-being mean to you?
What does
Well-being
well-being mean to you? I'd be cheating if I said being well, but well-being, I think, peace of mind. And if you're not experiencing peace of mind, there's no sense of urgency to get there. There's a sense of just even riding the wave of the human experience, and not kind of seeing one as being good or bad, that you can still be experiencing sadness or pain, but still actually even be okay, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, you step into being the watcher, the observer, and the awareness, and there's space between you and whether that's the world around you or even the world within you. That's how I would
describe it.
That's off the cuff.
Yeah. And what are you proud of?
My recovery.
Yeah.
That's one thing that comes to mind. I'm proud that I've continued on the self-development journey. I'm proud that I don't feel like I love to, those parts that are really uncomfortable, it's where I tend to start. I just kind of, I'm like, I have no time for this. If I noticed something years ago, I just would avoid it and resist it. But I'm proud that I'm like, yeah, that's something going on there for me. If I'm honest with myself, let's look at it, let's explore it. So yeah, that's what I'd be proud of.
Yeah, that's my last question. Yeah, Jesus Christ, it's over an hour. It's over an hour. Sorry.
I told you. Why are you apologising? I told you. You give me one question, I'm going to give you about 40 seconds.
No, it's been great. I'm just going to stop press the red button. Sorry.
No, come here. Do you
have
know what?
to.
I'm here with you. I am in the arena with you. This is literally the part where you're just jumping through that kind of...
Yeah.
Your body's like, why are you doing this, James?
Just have something to eat. Let's chill out.
Yeah. Why do you keep putting yourself in for these things?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for joining us today. Oh my God.
This is the best stuff, James. No, seriously. I think we should start it from here, because
This is like the card.
this is what they call it, off the head, like off the floor.
Yeah.
You're literally like, I'm here with you. I know too well this feeling. So like, let's just float it. Like, let's not take ourselves seriously.
No, once we get past this part, I'm good. It's just okay. Thank you for what the fuck is wrong with me? Okay, calm down. You know what? I actually joined. So, if you enjoyed today's episode, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a quick review on my Facebook page, Don't Be Afraid to Talk, or DM me on Instagram. The show notes will include all of the relevant links from today's episode. If you haven't already, please download, leave a rating, and share with your friends. You might just reach that person who needs to hear this message. Please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. I am James Lumumba, signing off with gratitude.